Didn't mean that, Brian.
That's fine. Glad to be of service.
There you go.
Signing in?
Good afternoon. My name is Douglas Kellner, co-chair of the Board of Elections. I ask our fellow commissioners to introduce themselves.
Jim Walsh. Andy? Jim Walsh, right? And Gregory Peters.
Would the Board of Elections staff introduce themselves, please?
Bob Brem.
Kathleen O'Keefe.
Brian Quayle. Tom Connolly.
Lisa Sugarman.
John Conklin?
Bill McCann.
Kim Galvin.
Todd Valentine.
Bob Warren, Election Operations.
Sheikh Aman, IT.
Maureen Cahill, IT. Amy Allo, League of Women Voters.
Welcome. All right, we start off as the Board of Canvassers, that there are amended election results because of changes received from Orange and Schuyler counties. Those in favor of approving the amended certification say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Do we need to sign it now?
Well, at some point, it's up to you. There's only one signature on the last page. Each.
Anna and Joe are meeting at county commission. I guess. That's what Joe told me.
All right, we will be back.
Well, if you need them on,
No.
times are tough.
State property. All right, so that concludes the work of the Board of Canvassers for today. We'll now start the work of the commissioners of the State Board of Elections. First item is approval of the minutes of December 15th, 2014. I note that we have the minutes of the regular meeting and the confidential minutes of the executive session.
So moved.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are adopted. Then we have the unit reports. We'll start with the co-executive directors, Robert Brem and Todd Valentine.
I think just put on the, so the commissioners know and those watching know, our election operations unit are not missing today from the meeting because they're not here. They're here, but they are starting the new commissioner training workshops that are part of the Election Commissioners Association Winter Conference here in Albany. It starts later this afternoon, the conference, and ends on Thursday. But on the arrival day and the going away day, we have a couple of training sessions for whether they're new commissioners, staff, or refreshing training for those who want to come anyway, for both the voter registration, or the voting system, election management programming is in one part of the building, and new commissioner workshops are in another part of the building. So both Anna and Joe are busy doing sessions as we speak. A number of other items of interest. I think one, we saw during December the appointment, after many, many years of it being empty, of the 3 of the 4 commissioners to the Federal Election Assistance Commission, so they're back up and running because they have a quorum. We're waiting on the 4th person, but that will see a little bit of change since any of the HAVA funds that are being administered by us, we have that formal process again where if there's a per unit price greater than $5,000 for something other than voting machines, we need their pre-approval before we can spend the HAVA dollars. So things like that will go back into the normal production once they have a chance to get up and running. Certainly the whole list of issues with the update to the VVSG and things that were pending for many, many months is still yet to hear what the new commissioners will set as priorities, but just one, it's different, they're funded, and they actually have people. So that is a big difference that we've seen just in December. As the agency, we continue to work staffing-wise. We had a new employee begin in the council's office. Dawn Roach, I think we mentioned, would be starting. She did start since our last meeting. And I know Risa brought a new, I think her last investigator, I think, came. Auditor started during that period of time.
She starts Thursday.
Oh, will start soon. So we are making progress in that regard. We still are working on a number of projects for the hearing officer process. I know we've had a number of conversations about getting that posted as temporary workers, et cetera, and coming up with the right number of people to bring on board what is the job description. There is an existing civil service list, or excuse me, description. There isn't a list to hire from.
We're going to cover that.
Oh, sorry. It's a
Agenda item.
We'll get to it as our agenda item. Sorry about that. We'll have nothing to talk about then. Other than that, I think it's just mostly the work to prepare for the conference and for today's board meeting.
Yeah, and the only just follow up with, as Bob mentioned, with the federal EAC as appointing their commissioners, we're scheduled to, at least as far as the state election directors are there's a meeting next month in Washington. We're planning on attending. They should be there for that. Maybe their first public appearance. So hopefully after they've had settled in for a little while, we can see some of the direction they're going and go from there.
We've asked them we've submitted the travel request to the deputy secretary. Since it's out of state, travel has to be pre-approved. So we're still waiting for that answer.
Good. I certainly endorse you attending the conference. I think it's very important to stay informed as to what's happening at the federal level and in other states, and that we really benefit by sharing that information. So if we need, if that helps with the executive, let me know and I'll pass it on. All right, next is a report from our councils, Kim Galvin and Kathleen O'Keefe.
Okay, Bob mentioned the new secretary. We're very happy that she's come aboard. We've been preparing for the conference. We have a brief presentation on the compliance unit for the commissioners, tell them how that works. We also have been updating the election law update to try to share that at the conference. We're hoping to do that. We have ongoing discussions regarding the processes that we're trying to put in place with respect to compliance and enforcement. There's all kinds of places where we sort of meet each other at different aspects as people are doing their filing or not doing their filing. We've got an ongoing discussion regarding that with the hope to prepare some kind of form. We've actually internally been sharing that among the staff where we might be able to give Risa sort of a status update of where various filings may be in the compliance unit to make things a little clearer on both sides. We have had discussions as well regarding the hearing officer issue, the voter registration form, all the various different legal issues that come up. Essentially what's been happening with compliance is that we have these winding down seminars that are planned. We're going to do one in January, one in February. January 22nd from 10 to 12 is the first one, a winding down the campaign webinar. We wanted to make sure we get the word out about that. If somebody's run for office and they were not successful and they want to close their committee, this would be a good webinar to view, and you'll find out how to do that. Compliance, in 2014, compliance did close to 10,000 reviews. So it's very, very significant amount of work that was done in the 6 months between July and the end of the year. We are waiting at this point on the Consumer Price Index from the U.S. Department of Labor in order to do our usual CPI adjustment, which is required every 4 years. It appears that those numbers are coming out later and later, but we are limited to using that, so we're waiting for those numbers. The January periodic report is due on Thursday, January 15th, And all committees are required to file this report, so we will be going into our new periodical report with all the additional work that comes with that. And we will be at the winter conference with the hope of being able to answer whatever particular questions people may have that flow from the update as well as from the compliance presentation. Anything else, Kim?
Just that there's going to be another campaign finance CLE. Kathleen will be presenting at that with Bill and 2 of our trainers. That's on Thursday. For anyone that's interested. That's
Oh,
what the
and
attorney-
that's credit for CPAs, I think, too.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's lawyers as well as accountants can get
Yep.
credit for that.
I'm very disappointed that there's no report on our legislative proposals. Has there been no discussion on these items? What has to happen to move any of this stuff? Or is it just that everybody's against everything that we're talking about?
No, I mean,
No, I
we've
don't
been
think that's the
busy.
case.
I don't think that's the case. We've been busy with a lot of things that seem to take precedence. Not to say that that isn't extremely important. Internally, we've had some discussions. We need to obviously sit down, the whole staff, and
Well,
move things
there
forward.
are a couple of things where I thought that there's, at least in general, a bipartisan agreement. For example, that we eliminate all local campaign finance filing from the counties, and that the state take over that responsibility. That's, we've talked about that 2 or 3 times. We were gonna draft something and have that in the legislative proposal. And then I know that there are drafts about cleaning up the audit process in order to change the 3% formulas and to allow some computer assistance in the manual audit process.
Yeah, Anna had shared the draft a while ago when the report was completed.
And then there's a
For
draft
testing
on
of
electronic poll
technology.
books, and there's a draft on unifying the canvas procedures
And they did clarity
statewide
training
to take
for all
out the New
tools.
York City exceptions. And I raised this in November, and we said we would have it for the December meeting. It didn't happen in the December meeting. It hasn't happened in the January meeting, so do we need to put this as a special agenda item on, for the February meeting in order to discuss it? Or is it that, to me, these are valuable things where we ought to be providing input to
It's not an
the
issue
legislature.
that there, I mean, on some, we've talked in the while, there may be differences of opinion, but on many, it's mostly been juggling some of the other issues to get ready for this meeting and some of the other work on regulations that are part of today's conversation. So I really think it just didn't,
Okay.
we haven't had the opportunity. I think we certainly will find time to
Well-
deal with it in the very near future when the conference is over.
I just want to raise, I'd say that it should be, there should be a review of these items that I've mentioned for the February meeting, so that the commissioners can talk about them. Unless you're just saying, no, we're against looking at it. All right, is there anything else on the legal? Now, the next part would be election operations, and you've explained that Anna and Joe are not able to be here now because of their new commissioner responsibilities. The one item that was pending for election operations is the report to the legislature on lever voting machines. What's the status of that?
I know Anna and Todd have been sharing. Anna did a draft, Todd gave some comments, and Anna sent some comments back. I've lost track of what day last week, but so they're continuing to work on it. I don't know that we have a final version yet, but we certainly have had three versions going back and forth to get comments within the last 10 days, so I know.
The report is due
End of the
month. At the end of the month. So, what's the plan in terms of getting it out? Is it that Todd and Bob are going to agree, and if they don't, we just have to release each side's version?
Well, it's an important issue, so I think that we really have to have this thing done by the end of the month, no matter what. Obviously, I would like to see, and I'm sure the rest of the commissioners would also like to see, what you're going to finally propose, so that we're in agreement. And I mean, this is a very important issue for a lot of the local governments throughout the state, and it has to get done by then.
Should we review what the issues are that there's disagreement on?
It's going to be hard without Anna.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting that we need to meet before the end of the month?
No, what I think we can do is, as you're suggesting, is circulate a draft to you, and then based upon that informal sign-off from the commissioners, then Bob and I can promulgate the final report. But the statute doesn't envision that the board vote on that, but obviously we wouldn't put it out without your consent, and then you can. So that is the plan.
I think the primary disagreement is that some people don't feel that the 200 pages of comments or whatever were adequately incorporated into the draft. So we're working on coming to consensus there.
Okay. I mean, I'm not against meeting earlier if we need to, but I do think we should get the report out. Okay, great. All right, next is public information. John Conklin.
Thank you, Commissioner. We've been busy making preparations for the conference, as every unit is. Tom and I have been participating in the Nysboe Refresh meetings and the Campus Vitus project meetings as well. We've been part of the discussion about the voter registration form and the draft that's been working. The public information part of the unit has been fairly quiet during the holiday season, as usually is what happens. We filed a year-end report with HHS, and we had 38 foils in November and 50 foils in December. Do you have anything you want to add, Tom?
We're just working with just a few number of counties to make sure they get all their voter history in for the general election from November. There are still some outstanding voters that we know we need to get history, and we usually give, per our requirements, 60 days from the election date for the counties to get that kind of part of the process done. So at this point, we're just kind of following up with them on a daily basis if they're still need to try to get some, because we do get a lot of requests for the voter data, and people often at this point will ask if it's updated with all the voter history information from the most recent election. As far as I know, we mentioned the branding at the last meeting. We have been slowly trying to implement that where we can. We did finally get some of the files that we needed from the state, and we will continue to do that as we produce new documents. We have done that for the conference presentations. And I think the only, we've been working with election ops with regard to data for the EAC, the annual survey. And then the last thing that I have is in a follow-up to Commissioner Kellner's question about some of the interstate exchanges from last month. We did receive information since then on the cross-check. I did ask Brad Bryant from Kansas about information for setting that up. We did circulate that information. We did look into what would be required and what our IT group would have to be able to do in order to participate. At this point, we'd be looking to see whether or not the commissioners are interested in participating. The first step of participation in that cross-check comes this month. They do it every January where they pull the file. Basically, of the two exchanges, it would take our voter data, it would match it against all the other participating states, look for a match with first name, last name, and date of birth. There are other fields that are collected, including last four of social, and also whether or not that person voted in the most recent election. They would then take that information, they would kind of match it with the other states' data, and provide us with a file towards the end of January, beginning of February, with the results of that process. And then, unlike, let's say, Eric, where there are certain things that would have to be taken, certain actions that would have to be taken, there's no such actions for the cross-check. The cross-check, just in order to participate, you really just need to pull the data, give it to them, they'll do all the processing, and then they'll give it back to us. What we do from there is kind of up to us, and being that we've never participated in the program before, we've had some discussions internally, and we were thinking about possibly piloting it with a few counties just to see what the quality of the data that we get back is, because it is a much more of a basic match, and then determine whether or not continued participation in the program is merited. But we'll be looking for the
It sounds
commissioners.
productive. I mean, is there agreement on this among the staff?
I know we talked briefly last week. The concern, I think it would, if we do anything, a pilot is justified. I use the example because the first year as a county election commissioner, when they started NCOA, one of the programs included NICSI, and I don't really and the National Change of Address through the U.S. Postal Service is NCOA, but NICSI was a subset within it, and we did it. But we learned that in any list maintenance, there's always a few, but it was probably less than 20% valuable, so 80% of work, a lot of work to find 20%. So when we talked last week, I think a pilot, if a couple of counties want to volunteer to participate, would be needed to see, is it valuable material before we generally tell all the counties, it's a good idea or not. But, you have to get the data to test the data to see is there any value to using it.
So can we as commissioners agree to authorize them to go ahead if they find answers?
Yeah.
Okay, so the commissioners are by consensus agreeing that you should proceed.
Thank you.
All right, is there anything else from public information? Good. So next is information technology.
We still have our three major projects, and during the I've lost track of the days now. The end of December, we had a series of meetings throughout the fall, and we are trying to come up with what our list of requirements. We're busy trying to refresh Nysvoter and to also come up with a new platform for the candidate management and the campaign finance. But the third item, which is a major one, is also the data. All the rest of the Board of Election data is in a state data center that is all being moved to the building, which is the SUNY nanotech building. So it's very difficult for us to design and plan to move into something since it's being designed while we're trying to plan. So our staff met and came up with all of the list of requirements that they think they need answers to, and software and hardware that will need to run it. And we've shared that information now with our general government cluster team, and they have shared it with the State Office of Information Technology Services. Our staff continue to try and attend the weekly design meetings, but it's kind of the foundation answers that we're going to need to know. We need the answers to in order to design the system, and we're at a point where we're now waiting on a meeting with the information technology staff, to answer our questions, and we're hopeful that they'll tell us yes, it'll work, or at least give us a recommended work you know, if we want to do it this way, it can still be done, but it'll be done this way. So we can at least analyze it and see if it will work for us. So it was a lot of work, and it was what the groups needed. You know, there's a lot of up in the air since it's all going into a brand new platform, into a brand new building, that we're learning is all being done. And what we're looking for is, we need answers in order to know if that's our solution, because, you know, you can't, you know, nice voter has to be done by the end of this year for the contract. We are fine if the assumptions we have are answered to us, yes, this is what we can count on. It's going to be harder for candidate management and campaign finance, since it's a lot older and we have to design all, you know, whole new concepts around it. So we really need the answers to the questions that we've given them. It was a lot of work. It's a major project for them. We're still, in addition to the technology requirements, we are still working with Todd and I in HR to get the specifications out for the replacement of Dave Loomis from a project management point of view. We're working on, Dave's helping us to make sure that we have that information worded correctly for what we're looking for, and also what we consider to be the deputy in that position. Dan Valvo has told us his intent to retire at the end of February, so it's a civil service position, so we're looking for that list for that position, and we've begun the canvass of the names on that list to see if anybody's interested in replacing him. Hopefully, if there will be any overlap, that would be our preference. That, you know, we can do a shadow position so that at least there'll be someone here during that period of time. We use that same technique when Colleen just retired from HR, and it helps if there's a couple of weeks where somebody can at least shadow the person that they're replacing. So we're working towards that for that unit also. I don't know if there's anything other.
Well, we'll plan to, related to the two major projects for Nice Voter and candidate and financial management, we'll plan to do an update to the county boards this week at the meeting. So just kind of, while most of it doesn't impact them, you know, there are potential impacts for them in some of the processes they have to change, but just need to keep them apprised of that. This is an opportunity for them.
All right, any questions? Last but not least, enforcement, Lisa Sugarman.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will also be participating in the conference this week. I'll be participating in a panel discussion tomorrow, and I'm not sure that I'll perhaps give all the information during the panel discussion, but I'm also slated to give information during an enforcement part of the Board of Elections information. I have a PowerPoint that I developed for that purpose. Hopefully it'll be good information for the county commissioners about their role with the state enforcement with my division. We sent out the letters, the first batch of letters, the cases or the matters that went from the compliance unit, the list that came to my division. We sent out those letters. I think they went out Monday, and we've been getting calls every day from people who have received those letters, both because they want to come into compliance or they're having trouble with the IT part of the compliance. So we've been fielding those calls or referring those calls to IT. We did a test run of, the letters were about 500 in number, and we only sent them to the treasurers, not to the candidates, because we wanted to see how many calls we were getting. So that was our first test drive. So we've been getting calls every day, and we've been answering them, and we're trying to see how many we can answer and develop a knowledge of what those calls are going to be, and then work with compliance to see what kind of training my people need to answer those calls. So that's a work in progress. We also have been testing out case management programs because I'm sure all of you recall the report that indicated that it was necessary for the Enforcement Division to have a case management. So we've been working on that, and we've been looking at a particular program for us to develop for our case management. And I guess we'll talk during new business about the update of the hearing officers.
I'm still very concerned that we're still way behind schedule in terms of proceedings against the non-filers.
Mm-hmm.
So we now have, my understanding is that that you've just sent the letter out for the July 15th non-filers, but no letters have gone out for any of the 3 primary filings or the 3 general election filings.
That's correct.
So we're now 7 cycles behind. And January was the time when we would usually have, we'd be preparing the filing for the November, for the general non-filers.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that the letters haven't even gone out yet really troubles me. And I just urge you to try to get on top of that. Can you tell us what's happening with respect to the collection of the outstanding judgments? And whether that project has been dropped or whether you're doing anything now to pursue people who have not complied or paid with the judgments?
We are looking at those numbers, and I'm looking into a process that I'd rather not discuss yet. It's something that I'm looking into, and hopefully we'll be able to discuss with the board at our next meeting.
Okay. Put that on the list then. It took me 6 years, 7 years to get the old enforcement unit to start doing active judgment collections, and so
I'm
I
hoping
can
to
wait
be able
another
to
month.
discuss it with you next month.
All right, great. Anything else for enforcement now? All right, then we'll turn to the new business agenda. The first item is the voter registration application to add the 2015 political parties. And I guess we also did a little bit improvement on the usability of the form with respect to the enrollments. Any comments on that? I don't know if it's in the packet. I didn't see it in the packet.
It's not, the form is not in the packet per se, but we've been sharing some words back and forth and some, I mean, there's 2 issues, the updating the parties based on what happened in the last governor's election, and when will we know the name of all those parties. But also we've been trying to improve the, as we talked about at last month's meeting briefly, the instruction under the political party section to be a little clearer. So I know we've shared those back over to Todd last week. And I think we're waiting on a name change too, from the form itself.
Well, yeah, there's 2 issues. One is, I mean, if we're simply just changing the name, that would be fairly straightforward. Although there's a slight twist, because we have information, although I have not filed yet, that one of the groups is intending to change its name, although that hasn't filed, so I don't know if we could say anything. We understand it's coming, we just haven't seen it yet. The second thing is related to the change to the language, and I had shared these with Bob, and the form of the language on the registration form comes from 2 different things. One is the statute itself, so the language has to comport to the requirement of the statute, which, that's always depending on how you read it, so the draft is being circulated to try to get people's impact on that. The second thing was that form is also has been subject to litigation and court decisions in the past. And there were 2 that directly set the form of the form. And, you know, the question is whether or not these changes that are proposed comport with the requirement under the mandate of the court that were.
You're talking about Judge Gleason's order.
That's both that one and the one from Judge Rakoff with the Independence Party. So, you know, and there were some slight changes to the language towards the end of last week, so even slight changes can have a big difference, and you want to make sure that we're not in contempt of the court orders. So that's why the draft is not in the packet, because at this point, we're still seeking some input, certainly from our commissioners. I don't think it would hurt to talk to some of the veteran county commissioners for their views, as well as other interested parties when we get to that point.
Well, I'm happy to circulate it. Obviously, I think that the language of the old form was not in the most usable form and had the effect of psychologically steering people towards the Independence Party, even though that wasn't the intention of it. So I do think that this language is clearer and fairer. I think it's consistent with the court orders. But if you're saying you need another month to look at it, I guess it makes sense, because if the party's going to change the name, then we don't want to spend a lot of money printing the form.
We at least have that.
You know, my experience is that I'm just concerned that people know they're picking a political party. That's it. Rather than being a blank. And my experience has been that it's so confusing that people should have wording that at least gives them the opportunity to make the choice intelligently. And with this new party, if it changes its name to Reform, we're going to have a similar kind of situation.
Well, the names for the parties are, again, going back to the statute, are specified as, there's no there are limitations on what you can't choose, so.
I understand that. I just think people should understand they're voting for, they're selecting a party. That's all.
Yeah, well, I understand that, but I also, you know, the problem with the statute is it bans certain terms, but then as long as you fall within
You don't use a banned one.
the limits, I don't know if there's any limitation on that we would be able to.
I'm not arguing that, Todd.
Yeah,
All I'm
that's what I'm
arguing-
saying in response.
Yeah, the
I
people in my
understand that.
family that registered in the Independence Party thought that they were registering independently.
Guy in charge of my detail, I said to him one day, I said, "What are you registered at?" He said, "Oh, I'm an independent." I said, "How about your wife?" He said, "Oh, she's not registered in the party."
Yeah, I agree.
With respect to Judge Gleason's order, I don't think there's any question that this proposed form meets that standard, but I have not seen the other case that you've mentioned.
Okay, I sent it to Bob, and I can make sure that I send it to
Okay,
Bob.
that would be helpful.
I forwarded whatever, so I'll find it.
Yeah, I can take that out. No problem.
All right, so we'll put this off until our next meeting.
I think helpful in the interim, as we've said to people, you know, at the last meeting we came up, is on the other line, persons wishing to register. I mean, whenever we change the form, there's a certain period of time where, you know, there's an old form out there, people need to, you know, how to use the old form. But if people who want to register in the two new parties that were created at the last election certainly could write them in any other category in the interim, and county boards would process those till we come up with the final. And if a party, and it's just like the last time, if a name changes, they usually treat everybody who was in that other worded one to move them all into the newly worded one.
And we'll circulate the drafts to the county commissioners.
Yes.
That's what you said?
Yes.
So we'll, at least they'll
Just make it
see what
draft
we're looking
across
at.
it then.
Okay. Next is hearing officer process. I guess we need proposed regulations for that, right?
Well, there's a number of things, that's why we listed also process. Hearing, the regs are one, I think generally we're at the point to, you know, conversations in order to classify the title and to create how many of these positions we want. Clearly, it's a new program for all of us, and in our conversations, Todd and I and Risa, we're looking to do these individuals serving as hearing officers for the civil enforcement cases, to be, per diem employees for now. We're looking for a number, I think, up to 10 people, so that we can, without knowing if you need them, I just can't imagine somebody sitting around waiting for us to call them on the phone. And if we don't use them for, a couple of months, they may decide they're not going to pay their bills counting on us, and they just might not be available when we need to call them for whatever reason. So we need a number of them just to be sure we can function when it is we need the function. So I think from that administerial kind of work, we've had those conversations ongoing to get those positions classified. We've confirmed the job description and the preferred requirement that an individual have, so that I think our hardest part is going to be get the resumes and interview the people and find out, can they do this work or not.
Is there anything the commissioners have to do? We need regulations, right?
We have drafted that, and we just shared that with Todd and Risa within the last week to 10 days. So certainly we need to get the feedback within the building if the draft is touching on some items. You looking at some other state agencies that have hearing officers. So hopefully by your next meeting, we should be able to have comments back from people. At least to give you to start the hearing process, the regulation process.
Yeah, to answer your question, the board will have to do two basic things. One is to adopt the regulations that SAPA requires the hearing officers to operate under. And then the second thing is also to actually have to appoint the pool of hearing officers. So that's what we're working on. We have to approach it from two fronts. One is just the regulatory front, and then the hiring front, putting the mechanism in place for those. So
I saw a draft circulated about 2 weeks ago. Why isn't it on the agenda today?
on the regulations,
Yeah.
because I haven't finished going through it. I only got it, I didn't get it 2 weeks ago, so it would have been closer to Bob's 7 to 10 days. So, and we're still working through that because they were not simply adopted from one pre-existing agency. They're a cross-reference of a couple different agencies,
Right.
as well as SAPA requirements, as well as redundancy for the statute, so it's taking some time to get through them.
So we'll have them on the agenda for the next meeting? If we need 2 drafts, we'll put 2 drafts on the agenda, just so we can get them posted and get the thing moving.
For comments? I mean,
Yeah.
we could do that just for informal comments.
Well, informal comments, we could put as many, I'm just thinking for the rulemaking, I think I'm not sure we'd have 2 versions out there.
Well, I
If we
guess
get to
what
that
I'm
point.
trying to say is, let's set as a target to get this done,
Yes, we
to
can
get
set that
this on
as
the
a
agenda for the
No
next
problem.
meeting, and if we can't agree, then at least let's publicly air what the areas of disagreement are, so we can start to get feedback and try to get this done. Risa, do you have anything to add about the process for getting the hearing officers in place?
We've been in the discussions, we've got the, I think I got the draft the same time that Todd did. The lawyers in my unit are looking at them as well as I am looking at them. And we're also looking at the regulations that are in existence now for HAVA, because I think that they're all, we really should look at everything at the same time, since all of those things are coming into enforcement as well. So I think that if we're gonna look at things, that we should look at the,
The way the statute's written, Commissioner, the HAVA administrative complaint procedure is left to the agency. When we, prior to the new enforcement unit, rewrote them to go into enforcement, but I don't think there's been any institutional determination that they would remain in enforcement, that there's a certain operational aspect to them. So there's been no internal discussion among staff as to that, but certainly as it stands now, the regulations are written that it would go to the enforcement unit as that was indicated prior to the change in statute. But as it stands now, there's been no, internal discussion on that. So that's something that would have to be looked at.
Okay,
Well,
so
I think that's worth looking at.
since the HAVA complaints are coming to me, maybe that decision should be made. So, I mean, I don't have any
You've been
Why wasn't
desire
HAVA complaints? I'm
one
not
way or
aware-
the other.
There's only
in
been one
5 years.
formal HAVA complaint in the history of the
They may not
process.
fit within the statute, but they're described as HAVA complaints, so they've come into my unit. I have no desire one way or the other to get them, if you want to keep them in the.
The informal HAVA complaints, I thought, were referred to operations.
Well, I can tell you, I don't know that, I don't know that.
Or the counties.
Right.
Right, well, I can tell you, historically speaking, we, like you mentioned, we had two, well, they were related, the two New York City HAVA complaints. And I frankly don't recall any technically filed informal HAVA complaints. We would receive complaints that had operational aspects, but people were either complaining about, something that had to do with elections operations. The HAVA complaints themselves, though, there are a lot of complaints that come into the board that have to do with boards of elections, et cetera, that aren't necessarily HAVA complaints, because HAVA complaints under the statute are geared specifically to Title III
Right.
of HAVA, which does have a litany of things that fall under it, but it's certainly not all encompassing to every aspect of election operations, which I also think had something to do with the limits of the types of complaints we got. Again, so Title III is very specific to that.
Well, and the one proceeding that we had was on voter registration.
Right, certainly. So, but again, it has not been an activist area amongst complainants, so. But again, the issue that Risa raises is certainly, I think the board has to look at that and figure that out, because she's correct that the regulations as written now call for those complaints to go through enforcement, enforcement council, as it was reflected there. But certainly that's just a
And we
regulation.
do spend,
Well, to that end, Commissioner, I'm glad you
we
raised
spend
that.
what, 15,000 a year to
No,
keep the
no,
the standby?
But to your
right.
But to your issue, no, the voucher is, the way it's been done historically is it's $10,000 for admin, and then there's a potential additional $5,000 for training, and then an additional pot of money for the arbitrations if it were ever to get to that point. But I know that Commissioner Kellner has raised the issue of what that process is, and so we just received the invoice for that, but we have not processed it, because I know that you specifically asked that staff look at that. No, but I know that, but I'm just
Well,
saying,
the
you asked
question
that.
is that, and that's why Risa's comment is productive.
Right.
Can the two be integrated in such a way that we don't have to keep paying the 15,000 to keep the standby HAVA arbitrators when we're now gonna have
I don't want to give an off-the-cuff answer, because I haven't looked at it from that perspective,
And it's
so.
only 15,000, so I don't wanna spend
Right.
15,000 in the room today talking about it.
Well, I'm simply bringing it to your attention, so.
Well, it's the
And I-
potential to spend 15,000, should we need it, we've never needed to spend all of it. So agree, there's a sum to be, and the rest is the money that stays in the authorization. Should we actually get a complaint and have to do something, we have that money to do something.
And I hate to bring up another,
Go
there's
ahead.
also the Fair Campaign Code regulations, which would.
But that
would
is
also-
enforcement.
So that, we are looking at those regulations as well to see if they should all be under one, since they're all talk about those regulations.
Well, I think that's productive, and as I say, I'm not, as I said, there's only been one, or maybe there were two complaints that were consolidated into this New York City, and the issue there was New York City was not complying with the voter registration database
6 years ago.
requirements, right, 6 years ago, they're now in full compliance, but that's the only formal HAVA proceeding that's happened. And the kinds of issues, as Bill says, are really operational issues as opposed to campaign finance or criminal.
I would be happy to have it
But-
other places, but if it
but-
belongs with me, I will be happy to
But
take
if it's a
it.
procedural thing, it's mostly, so it's worth looking at.
Well, I
And
think
it may
that
be,
they-
it makes sense for your unit to,
Well, I think there needs to be a dialogue between, obviously, Reese's folks and us to talk about that, because from a logical standpoint, and also certainly institutionally with the Fair Campaign Code, there are quirks to that, that certainly it has not been looked at for a very long time, and certainly we'd like to have some input into that, so.
there's a way of rewriting it so that it passes constitutional muster, and we can let people know, how far we will go and how far we won't go based on our interpretation of the state of federal case law.
Right, but
I
certainly
mean, that's the real issue with the Fair Campaign Code, right, is that it's
Well, there's-
essentially unenforceable.
Well, there are certain aspects that were subject to challenge, but then there's also, not that, some people have argued that it's kind of vague, that the standards aren't really defined, so when you're dealing with, political espionage, for instance, or certain things like that, some people think things are just all fairs and love and war, and other people say, oh, that's atrocious, so how can you let that happen? I mean, again, I'm speaking very broadly, but those are the kinds of things that you'll see in those matters. So,
It needs a
Well, I think
discussion.
that'd be great, yeah. All right, is there anything else? We should discuss a date for our next meeting, and then we can go into executive session. Are there any proposals? Or do you want to just circulate dates among the commissioners and we'll get back? I don't.
A month from now would be the last week of February. We have the conference, if it's approved, the 11th through the 13th, so that would be bad.
That would be bad.
And it's kind of hard to do the meeting right early next week if we're not here to get it ready.
Is there a day of the
So-
week
I
that
can't
you
do
prefer?
last week.
You can't do the
Doesn't
rest of
matter,
February?
You
the
can't
last
do the
week in,
last-
last
can't
week in
do the
February,
last
I
week.
will not be here.
First week of
I'm
March.
flying in the next 2
I got the
months
week
for
before that or the
meeting,
week
so-
after that, so it's fine.
I think we should.
We could do the end of the week of February, like 19th, 20th maybe, or the first week of March?
President's
I can't do that week either.
and
16th's the holiday.
I'll be in Argentina.
How about the first week in March?
How about the first week of
I'm
March?
not flying out of that. I gotta fly in.
There are no holidays in
Right.
March, my list.
St. Patrick's Day.
That's right. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank
It's a
you.
holiday for most of the room, but.
On the state list, sorry. So do we want to look at the first week of March?
What's wrong with the
Yeah, any
third
day's
week
fine with me.
in February?
I think, the third week of February?
What's wrong with that?
That sounds good to me.
I mean, we could do the 19th or the 20th of February, if that would
I
work.
thought you were gone.
Yeah, you have a
isn't
problem,
that
You have a
President's
problem
Day?
with it?
I thought, he's gone the last week of February. I thought you said the week
When
before
are
the
you
week
going?
after.
I got the last week of
Before
February's
that.
out.
Oh.
I'm not-
Last week is out.
So,
Right.
yeah,
So
how
you
about
could
the
do 19th
20th?
or 20th, the end of that week. would
How
work.
about the 20th?
Friday, the 20th?
Or Thursday?
Where'd you go on Thursday?
Friday.
No, I'll be here.
Oh, so I thought this was.
Thursday.
Or the
would be
week
good.
before.
Thursday is
So
really
Put it
good.
towards the back of that.
Because then I can fly for 3 weeks.
Monday, the 16th, is the holiday, so that is
Oh, is
always
it?
at that
Yeah,
week.
that
That's
That's
President's
the
Day.
president's
Thursday the
holiday.
19th?
Thursday the 19th is fine.
Thursday, the 19th? Sounds good.
So the motion is to go into executive session to discuss enforcement
That's
cases.
219.
So moved.
Yes.
Correct.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thursday the 19th.
Opposed? All right, we're in executive session.
Lucky you.
Last time I couldn't get this thing to stop.
Tom, there's one other thing. So when you finish the executive
We had up until March, we were on the there for a while.
That's okay.
Train got stopped.
Yeah, too bad.
No, we're not gonna have that.
Then it's the same.
Funny, that was the day I was gonna take my mother away.
What?
Oh, I just thought.
Go ahead.
If I missed it, but I.